Welcome to Beyond the Balance Sheet, the podcast that helps advisors, clinical professionals, and affluent families understand the complexities of issues related to our mental, physical, and emotional well-being. Our co-hosts, Arden O'Connor and Diana Clark, will interview a series of guests on a range of topics, providing informative content and practical tools for professionals and families to consider. Here are your hosts, Arden and Diana.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Beyond the Balance Sheet podcast. I'm joined today by Alex Dayton. Alex, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Arden. Pleasure to be here.
Well, I'm excited about the topic, success and addiction, which I know is one that is close to our hearts at O'Connor Professional Group. We've done a video about addiction and affluence, which sort of ties with this as well. Just for our listeners and our viewers today, I'll give a little bit of background on Alex. Alex Dayton is a licensed mental health counselor. He is in private practice, but he's had a number of really impressive positions and consulting roles at institutions like the Freedom Institute, which is an outpatient addiction treatment program, as well as, I want to get the title correct, Veritas, which is a virtual intensive outpatient program used for licensed professionals, judges, lawyers, other types of licensed professionals. And I know you're a consultant with both of these great organizations now. I guess on that topic, let's just jump into sort of the needs of people who are licensed professionals. You know, do lawyers, doctors, judges, how do you think about their treatment? How is it similar, and maybe how is it different from the average person who goes in to get addiction support?
Yeah, great question. I think one of the things I discovered early on in trying to design the program for Veritas, which is designed to treat medical professionals and lawyers and judges, is that licensed professionals are really reluctant to get treatment. That we thought with a telehealth model, we lower the barrier to entry, create a confidential, compassionate, safe space. We were working with the physician health programs around the country. Each state has their professional assistance programs as well, or the lawyers assistance programs. But we knew that if the incidence is 10 to 20% of medical professionals who are struggling with substance use disorder, a small percentage of those are getting treatment. So there's this major gap that we thought we could potentially address. And it's really hard to get people to come into treatment voluntarily. That licensed professionals in particular, professionals in general, but licensed professionals have so much at stake with their license that they're so reluctant to seek treatment. And go through these backdoor entry points that aren't through treatment centers of where they're getting the full comprehensive care. So I do think that the more we can create treatment centers that specifically cater to different professional groups, the more that they can see their peers getting help, not just in the kind of a general population setting. Like when I was at Freedom Institute, we worked with a lot of professionals, a lot of doctors, a lot of lawyers. But it was very common that they would want to enter into treatment under some sort of alias. And often people were reluctant to use their real information or document the real information, or just thought we might be audited. So I think just really being able to address that specific need becomes a very important issue. And not everyone experiences it.
Gosh, that makes me think of just so many questions. So, one that pops to mind is, when you think about people who participated in this outpatient program, were they nudged to participate? Were they mandated to participate? Or sort of what would be that? Was there an event that sort of caused them to say, gosh, I really should seek help now? Yeah.
I mean, the goal was that we were going to get people to voluntarily come in, and that even I would meet with hospitals around the country, and trying to work with their support communities and programs within that system to encourage people proactively to seek treatment. But what we really find is that it's a more reactive system at this point, from employers and employees, and the professionals themselves, is that people are waiting until something happens. There's an inflection point, like some sort of a DUI or whatever it might be, and then people are coming into treatment. So when they come under that umbrella, a licensed professional at least, then they're typically mandated for treatment. Another professional might have a consequence where they're not mandated, but like strongly encouraged. I work with a lot of lawyers, and law firms will contact me directly to work in my private practice or, enter into Veritas. And there it's not as much of a mandate, but kind of just a strong recommendation that sometimes people follow up on and sometimes they don't. But there's this, I often don't even like to think of it as mandated because it implies they don't have a choice, and they really actually do, but they are very highly leveraged. They're really leveraged clients when their license is at stake.
Makes total sense. I guess one question I have, and I tend to ask more provocative questions, so forgive me for that. But when we think about doctors specifically, I think of them as a harder population to treat because they have the medical knowledge, because they are honestly paid to be sort of pillars of answers to everybody's questions and to project a certain level of confidence in their diagnoses. How did you find that unfolded in a group setting where part of the experience is really to be vulnerable, to be open to suggestion? Did you find that could be achieved, or did you find that particular patient population to be more difficult to treat?
It's such an interesting question because when we were first conceptualizing Veritas, and based on some experience that I have had in the past, we really did make that assumption that this could be the case, that it could be a challenging population in different ways, just because there might be kind of challenging the expertise of the counselors, questioning their credentials. Often, physicians at different levels are going to have, more schooling and training than the counselors they're working with, obviously in a different field, but nonetheless, just that emphasis on education and the credentials as being paramount. But what I really found, and what we found collectively, is that that just hasn't been the case for us. Now 3 years for Veritas and longer, and for Freedom Institute and in my private practice as well. Just that it's a really motivated population, actually. And that if you're providing them an alternative to treatment that they've been used to, it's refreshing for them. And, so having a telehealth model where they can do an intensive outpatient program, working with a coach who is either probably themselves a lawyer, a nurse, or a physician, because all the coaches at Veritas have that background. So they're really working with a peer, that it grounds them in a way that they become really motivated for treatment, because the system that has existed with the PHPs has been much more of a one-size-fits-all for a lot of PHPs. It's not true for everyone. Now PHPs, and there's some that are really wonderful, that are compassionately working with individuals, that try to meet the needs of individuals and kind of customize the care to them. But historically, it's been, you fail a breathalyzer, we're going to residential for 30 days. Even if they've had documented a year of sobriety, they could fail a breathalyzer and potentially do that. So to have this other option, I think, is really set up for a motivated clientele that's been great to work with, actually.
That's great to hear. Well, I have another question on the legal side, because when I think about lawyers, there's obviously a spectrum. So we've seen in our practice people who come to us who are solo practitioners, who are, quite honestly, some of them struggling financially, but are looking for coaching options or help figuring out the right match of a facility because they know things have gotten complicated. But we see that through, partners at national law firms, leading practitioners. When I think about just institutionally how law works and the billable hour, I think it's a system, honestly, that it's not surprising to see higher rates of anxiety, depression, and substance use, because there are ways that people can self-medicate when they're working 10, 12 hours a day consistently for not just a couple of years, but for a lifetime potentially. I'm curious what you've seen as effective when dealing with lawyers, because part of me wonders, is sort of the just very nature of the legal profession built to create some of these dilemmas that they're struggling with, or some of these issues that they're struggling with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, totally spot on what you're saying, that there are these kind of built-in aspects to the system that could be a real setup. Just having a certain amount of billable hours and really high targets. I mean, they're not small targets typically, especially at these corporate law firms. And then some law firms have that kind of open market system. So it's, you're going out and you're getting on deals and you get invited to deals. And but if you're not creating relationships with partners and if you're an associate not doing what is asked of you, then you worry that you're not going to get the deals to get the billable hours. So it's this kind of like eat what you kill mentality that can create a lot of stress for individuals as well, that they feel like they can't have boundaries, can't say no to things. And especially in the pandemic, once it all went remote, it was just on overdrive. And so I think one thing to your question that does work effectively with lawyers is to really validate that experience, is to help them to be seen that this is not normal. Even to their, some of their clients that they're working with at BlackRock, Blackstone, KKR, whatever it might be, where people are working tremendous hours. I mean, you think of people in finance in different industries as working really hard, and they do, that the lawyers are the ones who are working overtime in the middle of the night creating these deals. That it's this kind of really unique amount of work and just grind that they have to go through to get some of these deals through, that I think is important to help them be seen on. That's a good starting point, at least, for then encouraging them to start to create boundaries, Yeah.
I think it makes a lot of sense. I also think I hadn't thought about the angle of them working on deals with financial institutions, which often have less boundaries, and the lawyers are also the ones called upon to often, they're transacting things quickly. They're, the time is of the essence in that profession more than most. So it makes sense that having a group of them together, not only to commiserate, but to talk about, even share practices of how you do set boundaries. Because I think depending on where you are in the hierarchy of a firm, I think it's a really challenging proposition.
Yes, absolutely.
So broadly, I mean, we've touched a little bit on this, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how the sort of areas of addiction, success, and wealth touch each other. How do you think about the interplay between those factors? How do you see in your practice and with your experience at Veritas and the Freedom Institute, how did you see those kind of come together or not, or create problems for clients as they were walking in the door seeking help?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, for one, I think that wealthy people, successful people with power and privilege are really much more easily able to avoid their problems than people in the general population. And that becomes a major pitfall, that there are systems in place that are created to help people avoid their problems. At an early age with families, I work with a lot of young adults. I used to work with a lot of adolescents. So we would see it all the time that, hiring lawyers, friends who are judges, just whoever it might be to pull the strings to get people out of the consequences of their actions, which really did them a disservice later because it enabled them to go further into whatever the problem might have been. But this happens on all levels and all ages. And it's something that we see even as people are contemplating entering into treatment, that there's an ability to avoid their problems. And then another way that successful people often avoid their problems is that they justify or rationalize problems in one area of their life because they're having success in another. So highly successful people who are, slammed with work and crushing their careers then feel validated that whatever they're doing right. They're getting all these really quantifiable markers of their success. So why should I change anything? You're telling me to alter this stuff, but I just had my best year last year. What if I mess this recipe up, then I might lose some of the success and power, and I'm not willing to give that up. They've intentionally not had boundaries, intentionally not engaged in self-care. It's this like sleep when you're dead mentality that has gotten me to here. So wait, who are you to tell me to try to change this? Like, I don't think so. So it's it can just be challenging to get people's buy-in, again, unless that big consequences happened. You try to kind of maybe raise the bottom a little bit with some family members using some leverage or something. But otherwise, there's a kind of even a sense of unmanageability to people's lives who could be really successful professionals. And so the idea of adding treatment, ironically, seems even more unmanageable. I could never fit that in. I could never take a month off. I could never, so it's kind of like, snake eating its tail kind of thing.
It's a great analogy. And specifically on this point, I'd love to ask you about alcohol abuse, because when I think of those professions particularly, I think of extreme use of alcohol. Not to say other substances aren't, dependent upon it. Certainly there are others. But when we at our practice see justification, it's often around, well, I was out to a dinner last night and one drink turned into 3. And if you're doing that 7 nights a week, you're way above what we know are the nationally accepted norms. That said, we are also seeing a group of millennials, younger professionals who are coming in and are sober curious and inventing all sorts of non-alcoholic beverages. So I'm curious, are you seeing still a resistance? When I look at what the national norms are, and as I understand it, the NIHH just came out and said it's actually not one. It used to be 1 drink for women a day and 2 drinks for men. And I think they're now saying 1 drink for anybody, which is 7 drinks a week. Are you seeing an awareness of just that slippery slope, particularly post-COVID, during a time when I think people were holed up and alcohol became a way to sort of ease the pain? Do you see it with younger people, or are you seeing in general people still sort of saying, it's just an extra beer, or, it's just an extra drink and it helps me to relax kind of mentality?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we've seen a shift. I've seen a shift, not just in terms of kind of conception of alcohol being a problem, but just their willingness to get help, the normalizing getting help, the reducing of stigma to getting help. That I think a lot of people are still unwilling to look at their drinking or see it as a problem. Like, that's a common theme that definitely is still very prevalent. So all those kind of historical things that we've seen before in terms of denial is just being part of the symptomology. It's just built in, really. But that the stigma is reduced. So at least people are feeling more free to talk about it. Men in particular, I think, feeling more free to talk about it. There's a kind of more permission for men to seek help, I think. And even, in what we're talking about, successful, wealthy individuals to seek help.
So switching gears a little bit, talk a little bit about what DBT is. As a layperson and non-clinician, one of the things that overwhelmed me in the field was what I call the alphabet soup of clinical credentials and various forms of clinical treatment. But talk to me about what DBT is, and if for some, where did you find it most effective? And for people who it's not effective with, what are the other techniques people should consider?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so DBT essentially was created by Marsha Linehan and behavioral tech to be a modality treating individuals who are struggling with regulating their emotions and also with self-harming behavior. And that was the initial population that they were looking at was with borderline personality disorder. And those are kind of 2 of the hallmarks of that regulation of emotions and self-harming behaviors. But what I think they began to realize and extrapolate on was that really looks like a lot of populations, certainly with addiction and substance use disorder, that there's often a real difficulty in regulating emotions for people who are struggling with substance use disorder. And they could be engaging in a lot of self-harming behavior, including just the using of substances as self-harming, but then self-harming in terms of their behavior, to relationships, to their job, to, their life. So the idea of then developing skills, it's a skills-based approach to learning. There's 4 modules: mindfulness, distress tolerance, emotion regulation, and interpersonal effectiveness. And then within each of those modules are a group of skills that people can learn of how to be more mindful, how to tolerate stress, how to regulate their emotions, how to be more effective in asserting needs and setting boundaries. So it's very tangible. It's very concrete. People can really grab onto it, which can be very helpful. And the main tenet of DBT is Marsha Linehan wanted is my understanding at least, to not just help people kind of get to a baseline in solving their problems, but really go beyond that. So she thought, if I can't provide people with what she calls their life worth living, that what was the point? So she really wanted to go beyond and helping people to have the skills and the tools to live fulfilling, meaningful, satisfying lives. So part of what makes treatment effective, or any modality effective, is that it has to work for the client, but it also has to work for the counselor. And so I think this can be very effective for counselors because they can be trained in it. It feels valuable to them. They can apply it to their own life. I know I've certainly have. And then being able to disseminate it in a way that you can see change happening and actually improving the lives of people, not just eliminating some symptoms, but actually helping people to live the life they want to live, and even talk about that as a model, makes it really effective.
So I'm just listening to the various pillars of it, the distress tolerance, mindfulness. I mean, is there a DBT for children? It seems like something that should be offered to parents to train their own children in, because it seems like these are issues that we face across the board when raising kids. Have you seen it applied for younger folks?
Absolutely. I mean, there are so many different applications now. I'm sure that exists. I'm not 100% familiar with that, but when I first learned about it, I had the exact same reaction as you. I thought, like, oh my God, I'm going to make a Cliff's Notes on this for all these different populations. This is amazing.
Alex, I couldn't agree more. I just think when even the modules you talk about, and when we think about sort of things related to children and things that I think parents, but also other individuals in life struggle with. There's a reason that mindfulness has become such a popular topic in mainstream publications, because I think so many people, given the uncertainty in the world and the challenges of the last couple of years, so many people are seeking alternatives to just medications or self-medication through substances as a way to try and, figure out daily life stressors. So I love your description of it, and I can imagine as a clinician how inspiring it is to see the actual progress and to have something that's practically based and tool based so that it can be explained easily to clients, many of whom, if they've done traditional talk therapy, may feel like there's just no end to this, that they could be in therapy for years and years, and some that may be appropriate for, and some may feel like having something more tangible would be helpful.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's one thing that I felt as a therapist, and even as someone who had gone to therapy, I would sit with my therapist whom I really liked and I enjoyed seeing, but sometimes I would think, are you remembering what I'm saying? Are you connecting this? Is there a common thread to all of this? It sometimes would feel like just a bunch of different great conversations that we were having, but really having that through line was so important. And that DBT makes sure to have that towards your life worth living, and then even applying skills to it. So you have that anchoring point of, talking about your life, but then what are you doing to take responsibility for it? How are you addressing some of these issues?
That's great. So I have two last questions for you. The first is, what excites you about the development of the field? Are there things that you're looking forward to, or you think, gosh, we may be addressing, whether it's addictions or other types of mental health issues, totally differently in years to come?
And one thing that has excited me is just the incorporation of more technology into the field. Certainly with everyone going remote, and just bringing that element of technology in was really valuable. I think behavioral healthcare is really lagging in their application of different forms of technology. So that we've seen a real boom with that, with different apps and, just access to care, and all of it really just being about giving more treatment, more tools to more people. So that's exciting. I get excited about using it myself and with clients. Like, I'll tell them about different things that I've seen, which I'm by no means an expert in, but like, hey, you should check out this app. This is really cool, and just see what works for you. I can follow my own approach to modality, but it doesn't mean that, at least from my belief, is that people can't incorporate a host of different things to help themselves. And so to give people agency is one of the biggest things you can do. And with technology, people can really do that. So that's one thing that excites me. The other thing that I hope to see more of is more preventative care, especially as it working with professionals. As I said before, it's such a reactive system right now that we're waiting for people to get in trouble, waiting for something to happen. That, if you could start to really just, anticipate burnout before it's happening, give people, more resources and make self-care more important as a way of avoiding burnout, avoiding medical leaves, increasing performance, avoiding poor performance. I think at the end of the day, it really does help the bottom line, which is where you're going to get people's attention. But that I would love to see more of that. And I feel like that's happening more and more.
I completely agree with that statement. And I think I like to look at silver linings. If there was one silver lining with COVID, I think people in the employer space particularly are paying more attention to turnover and mental wellness. And I can't afford to ignore it, because the employee, the ability to recruit right now is harder than it's been in a long time. And so people are forced to say, how do we keep people here if we get good people? My last and final question for you is, when you think back on whether it's your personal or your professional journey, is there anything that sticks out to you that you say, gosh, I would change this about my journey? Or alternatively, I am so glad this happened and I would definitely want to keep this as part of my history. This was a defining moment.
There's certainly things I could look back on and think, and I've thought to myself at times, oh, I wish I'd done that differently, or I wish I could do this again, or I've experienced regrets in my life. I've done things that I've regretted. But I do have to say at the end of the day that I'm really happy with my life. If I think both personally and professionally, I feel really blessed to have a wonderful family, kids that I love, a wonderful relationship with my wife, a career that feels really meaningful and important to me, that connects me to people like you and a really professional group that I find stimulating and interesting. And so the idea of changing something or rewriting something means that it could potentially be different. It's like in the movie Back to the Future when they do one thing differently and then, Biff is still alive and married to his mom. I just wouldn't want to have someone else married to my wife. That would be awful if I rewrote something and then someone else was in my place. So I guess my answer is I wouldn't change anything.
I love it. It's a great note to end on. And thank you so much, Alex, for your time and your wisdom. I just think it was really impressive. And I think you're touching on a really important topic that I want to make sure gets the attention it deserves, because I think the population you've had a history of treating are some of the toughest, doctors, lawyers, and adolescents. I think for many clinicians, they would say, if I could pick 3 populations I'd like to stay away from due to the resistance to getting help, it would be those. So you've given us some hope, and I appreciate your participation today.
Thanks, Arden. It's been a real pleasure. I appreciate it.
Thank you to all of our listeners and our viewers. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please go on your platform of choice and give us a positive review, and we look forward to having you on our next episode.
Thank you for listening to Beyond the Balance Sheet, a podcast designed to help advisors, clinical professionals, and affluent families solve some of their biggest medical, psychiatric, and emotional challenges. Visit beyondthebalancesheet.com to read more about our guests and resources, and sign up for our newsletter.